So good afternoon. I just wanted to join you guys today. Well, first of all, let me say welcome to my channel. On this channel, I'm going to be discussing a little bit about my journey in my last semester as a family nurse practitioner student. Today marks the first day of my last semester, actually. Fun fact, I actually graduated last weekend, but since I'm finishing up in the summer, I had the option of either graduating in the spring or the fall, and the fall was not going to happen. After I'm done taking my boards, I'm ready to move on with life. So I decided to go ahead and graduate in the spring. So I'm getting ready, like I stated before, to start my last semester of the MSN FNP program. So I wanted to kind of document a little bit of my journey so you guys can see what it's like going to clinicals. I have 180 hours of clinical to complete this semester. My clinical site is actually about an hour away from where I live. I have to be there by 7. Typically I like to get there by 6:45 at the latest. So, with the traffic, I like to be out of the house by 5:30, no later than that, to make sure that I get there on time. So I'm going to document a little bit of that. I'll share with you guys some tips and tricks on how to survive MSN or nurse practitioner school. Let me tell you, it's been brutal. And I'm also a wife. I work full time. I have a daughter, a young daughter, so that's been very challenging. But it's definitely doable if you have the right support system in place. So I also want to talk to you guys a little bit about public health. I work in the public health sector. Once I'm done with school, I plan on continuing to work in the public health sector. I love it. I find a lot of value in what I do. I love the patient population that we take care of. And, I know that the public health sector has been going through a lot of challenges with all the different changes, the budget cuts with this particular administration. So, I wanted to discuss that a little bit, and still encourage, nurses and in particular providers that working in public health is, you're not going to obviously get rich. None of us go into public health to get rich, but it's a very rewarding field to work in. And so I really wanted to talk a little bit about that, encourage providers. It's a good way to even get your foot in the door and get some good experience, even if it's not somewhere you stay. I think that the knowledge and the experience that you gain is invaluable. Even if you decide to go somewhere else and work in the future, I think public health is always a good option. Depending on where you stay, if you're in like a rural setting or an urban setting, there might be more opportunities. Where I'm at, there's a few openings in the public health sector, but if you go in the more rural settings, there's always opportunities. I mean, those are underserved areas that typically are short of providers, so that's always a good option as far as trying to get your first job. So, we'll talk a little bit about that and all things nursing, and in particular nurse practitioner, since that's the journey that I'm on. I've been a nurse now for 20 years. I love what I do. The reason why I even decided to go back to become a practitioner was because the clinic setting that I was working in, again, it's a public health environment. It was a very rural community, and they could not, for the life of them, keep providers, mainly because they were not competitive with the private sector with pay. So after seeing that, I decided, why don't I just go back to school? I can stay working here. I love it here. I can serve the community, and this is what I want to do. So I enrolled, and then I ended up moving to a different location, but still no regrets. I'm very, very happy with my decision, and although it was a rough journey, I think that it happened at the right time for me, with where I was at in life. I think that I had the maturity. I also had the connections to be able to complete school, because let me tell you, that's another thing. Right now, I don't know if it's different than how it was a few years ago, but it's very, very challenging to find a clinical site. A lot of schools will not find clinical sites for you, and you may end up having to pay a lot of money for a preceptor. I thankfully have not had to pay a dime because I was able to leverage my relationships, and I've just been very, very blessed. So I'll talk to you even about that, like how you can find clinical sites in some of the more unconventional ways where you can go to try to see if you can get clinical hours, because that is let me fix my phone. I apologize about that. I'll just warn you too, I'm not technologically savvy, so my videos, they're gonna get better over time, but you're mostly gonna see me shooting videos in my car on road somewhere, because that's just the way that life is right now. So they'll get better over time. But definitely one of the biggest challenges is finding clinical sites. I personally have not had an issue, but I've had to network my butt off, and leverage all the relationships that I have. So I would say if you're thinking about going back for a nurse practitioner, you definitely want to keep that in mind and think about, who can I precept with? And then, different schools have different criteria. You might find somebody that's willing to precept you, but they, make sure, like, if you're going for FNP, you want to make sure that person is an FNP and not a, women's health practitioner or whatever. Like, they have to be able to meet your school's criteria. And then here's the thing that I found out. So I had a phenomenal practitioner that I knew of that was willing to precept me, but her employer would not accept students from my school because they had an agreement in place with another school. So that's a big challenge, especially, depending on where you live. If there's not many options for preceptors, man, I tell you, because these schools will have partnerships with, or these workplaces may have partnerships with a certain school, and if you're not going to that school, it's almost impossible to get in. So that's, I would say, one of the biggest challenges. Also, if you, like for me, where I work, I had to and wanted to continue to stay full-time. I did not want to leave my job. So I had to make sure that I had enough PTO saved up. So that's something else to, take that into consideration, because you're going to have to complete a certain amount of clinical hours. For my program, I had to do 600 hours. However, starting in the fall of 2026, the number of clinical hours for the program that I went to is going up significantly. I think it's going to be like around 740, 750 hours. So that's a lot of clinical hours. It's something to consider, Are you going to work part-time? And honestly, it sounds good to not work, but let me tell you, I feel like in this program, you need to work, because work is where you're going to get those connections. Work is when you're going to start putting all the pieces together. It's probably more challenging if you don't work. Now, I'm not saying you should work full-time. You might work part-time, but I probably wouldn't have gotten through this program if I didn't work, because a lot of the connections that I was able to leverage came through my job. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're thinking like, oh, I don't want to work, I just want to be able to concentrate and study. I get that. That's ideal, right? Who doesn't want to be able to just focus on school 100%? But unless you're just somebody who has like great connections and you're good on that, you might want to reconsider the idea of not working at all, because those relationships are going to be important when it comes to getting a clinical site. So yeah, tomorrow actually is my first day of clinicals, so I will probably log in the morning for a few minutes. Like I said, I typically try to leave the house about 5:30, and then It's a long day, y'all. It starts at 7. We see our last patient around 5:30. Hopefully, after charting and everything, we get out by 6:30. And then I live an hour away. Hour with no accidents or anything like that. So if there's any type of accidents or anything, an hour and a half. So it's going to be a long day tomorrow, but I will tune back in and bring you guys along my journey. So if there's anything particular you want to hear about, talk about, please drop a comment below in the comment section. I'll try my best to read everything and comment on, or read all the comments and keep up with everything. You guys, again, know I'm in school, so I'll do the best that I can. But thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.